Okay, so who here has dealt with anything related to observability before? Okay, decent number of people in the room. Okay, so since it's not everyone, I'm going to just do a very quick recap on what observability is. But yeah, so I'm Tiffany Jernigan. I work at Grafana Labs as a developer advocate. If you feel like asking me stuff afterwards and don't find me, you can just look at my website and there's links to various things there. Okay, so basically, in short, observability is the process of making a system's internal state more transparent. So who here has heard of the pillars of observability? Okay, so a lot of people have dealt with observability but haven't heard that part. Okay, so a lot of people talk about the 3 pillars of observability. So there's metrics. Who knows what metrics are? Okay, so that should be a larger number of people. So metrics, for instance, are things like how much CPU am I using? How much memory am I using? So then we also have logs. Who here has dealt with logs? Okay, similar number of people. So basically, logs can tell us information about what has happened. So maybe you have a log that tells you something happened with your application, whether it's an error or not. Maybe you have a log saying that you have some user who authenticated to your system. Maybe you didn't want them to or not. So then we also have tracing. Who has dealt with tracing before? Okay, smaller number of people, as I kind of expected. So basically, tracing lets you see the path of a request that you have, and it can also include actual metric information, such as like your maybe you have some sort of counter and you can go and see that. Maybe it also has your logs in there. So these different things together help you get a bigger idea of what is happening with your system. In the last few years, some people, depending on who you talk to, also think of there being a 4th pillar of observability. So that's where people have started talking about profiles. Who has heard about profiling? Okay, who has used profiling? A few people. Okay, cool. Yeah, so that can tell you like things like how much CPU and memory a function took. If you heard about things like eBPF, that comes along in here as well. And then different languages, you can see different bits of information. Okay, so people have probably heard about just people talking about LLMs earlier on with things. So they were great. They still are. Basically, they give developers or whoever is using them a way to access the context of, or a snapshot basically of some of the portion of the internet that it already had data to. So like if you use things like ChatGPT, there was a point in time where you're like, oh, hey, I'm going to ask a question, but it may have not known something that was more recent, for instance. And you talk to it using natural language. So you can just be like, hey, what is the weather like in some other place? Or just ask something that you would ask maybe a friend of yours or a coworker. You don't have to go and give it some special sort of like query. And then you can pass in some sort of context that you specifically wanted to already have, maybe some instructions like, hey, respond to me as if I was 5 or something like that. And so that gave you a lot more things that you can look into. So if we look here at this diagram that is going through, if you have dealt with flame graphs, so things like profiling, you may have seen something similar. So this is with Grafana Pyroscope. And basically, this is just an example of where, hey, we're taking in our flame graph and our profiling data pretty much, and we're feeding that to our LLM, and then we get some sort of description of what this actually means. But this is very specific in the sense of like, hey, I'm in this, like I'm using Pyroscope, for instance, and Pyroscope is Grafana's open source profiling, but maybe you have your own thing, but like it knows only about that information that I'm giving to it. It can maybe tell you things like, hey, if it has access to your code, like maybe it's on GitHub, for instance, maybe it can tell you more information, maybe it can be like, hey, this is potentially where something's happening, but again, it's only for this level of stuff. So like they knew what they saw in training, like for instance, if you wanted to deal with other Grafana things, if you're using Grafana, you couldn't interact with those. Like, I can't go over to that flame graph and be like, hey, create me a dashboard with that flame graph and create this other thing and give me my metrics. So that's basically where we like started looking into like having like maybe a set of defined tools. So like giving your LLM a choice to use a specific tool, and that allows it to go beyond just like what it has access to on the internet. So like if you just ask ChatGPT that has whatever it may have had access to there, but there's certain things that it might not specifically have found, may not know, or it may be so generic that it doesn't know exactly how to apply that. And then maybe, for instance, if you have something in a private repo, then it obviously wouldn't be able to see that. So that's where things with like MCP came along. And who here, seeing that this is an MCP conference, who here has actually used an MCP server? Okay, so who had like never heard about MCP servers before like the last 3 months? Okay, so I think I'm somewhere in the like last 6 months or so. But yeah, so basically like with our specific one, which again, if you were building your own, you would have it defined to whatever you're specifically doing. Like it allowed it, one, it's open source, because yay, open source. But basically, like we could actually go and do things like being able to go look at our dashboards. I can go and create a dashboard. I can ask, hey, what is failing? Like what are some of my errors? Give me some traces with errors, things like that. And basically, you could actually finally start doing things that you may not know how to do it beforehand. Like say, whether maybe Grafana has MCP server, maybe some other observability system or something else has an MCP server. Now you don't have to necessarily go and be like, okay, well, how do I understand that product's like query language or however that works? And have to figure out for all those different ones. Maybe you're just trying to understand, or maybe there's something you want to go create and it will take you too long to do it, but it'll be faster for AI to do it. So like, basically we could just go and be like asking it questions. We can have it just tell us things, but then there is also the ability to go and actually create something. So I am going to go over to demo part now and hope that things go well. Okay, so let's get rid of that. Okay, so I just have this sort of apparently not loading application that is super exciting because it keeps doing this with my lovely internet. Let's just go over to iTerm for now and clear things out. Okay, so if I do a Docker PS, it looks kind of hard to read since I am currently on a bigger screen, or I have it bigger so people can read. In some ways, that makes it worse. But basically, I have a Docker compose file. I have different pieces of my application that are running. I have things for tracing, logs, profiles, et cetera. I have those all running. If I were to go over to, let's see, if I go over here, who has used Cursor with MCP Server before? A few people. Okay. Yeah, so there's this lovely mcp.json that you throw into your .cursor file, or .cursor directory. And so we have our MCP servers. If I scoot this over so people can actually see. So we have the MCP servers. We have whatever commands. So for this one, it's the MCP Grafana. So it's just the binary that I pulled down. Grafana runs on localhost 3000 if you're running it, well, locally. And then I needed some sort of service account token to be able to give permissions for it to go and do the things that I want it to do. So if I have that, so before I actually had that there, if I was to just go and ask Cursor and be like, hey, what are my Periscope services? It will go through all the files that I have here. And it's like, okay, well, here's this file, here's all these things. But it doesn't actually know what Periscope is like actually having access to, since it doesn't have access to that. If we look in Cursor settings, I actually turned it on afterwards. So if I do a new chat, like using Grafana MCP, what are my Periscope services? And it's faster in some ways, depending on who you're asking to go and look at those things. So like if I went over here, which that didn't load, but if I were to go over to, let's say if I'm in Explorer and I go over to Periscope, and then you're like, okay, well, what all do I have here? Can I get CPU, et cetera? I want to be lazier and go over to query lists. You can see like there's different like profile types, and then if you're looking at like labels, I can see things. For instance, you can just go through here, but you're taking more time to be like, okay, hey, what are the different services I have? Because a lot of the time, the observability tools that you're using are based on you knowing what you already have and being able to create something based on already having that information. But say if you are given something and you don't know really how it works, how do you go and figure that out, and then learn how all of these different tools work, learn all the things that you have to go and create. So if I go back over here, yeah, we can see that it is instead actually going through the data sources, and that we can see the different ones that are there, and we see what the services are, and you can see this is not actually going through the code. But if I next was like, hey, create a dashboard called MCP Academy that has the red metrics, so like some of my errors that I have. So that will take a bit longer, but like say if I were to go over back here, if you go over to dashboards, like I created a bunch of random ones, but like if I were to go create a new dashboard, so then you go and you're like, hey, I'm going to add a visualization, but then you have to know, okay, what in this dashboard, what data sources do I actually care about? So like, for instance, maybe I want something Mimir, which is using Prometheus metrics. So then after I have that, okay, I can see that I have some sort of graph here. The resolution's a little wonky, so it makes it hard to see things on here. But then it's just like, okay, so what metric do I need? All these other things. But if you already know what you're looking for, that is a lot simpler. But like right now, I haven't really used this much. How do I know what all I need to go and look up to be able to create a basic dashboard for the things I need? So if I go back over here, it's still taking its sweet time. I guess over time these things will end up getting faster, but in the end it's still going to be faster than it ended up taking me to do. So there's like other things that you can do. So like right now, for instance, there's the Grafana MCP that has like maybe things for logs, metrics, profiles. At the moment, there isn't anything for tracing specifically in there. So sometimes you may have to add like additional MCP server for the thing that you might need there. So like if I go over here where I have Claude running. So who has used Claude with MCP servers? About similar to Cursor. So like if you do, like I could do, for instance, a Claude MCP add. I did that already with Tempo, which is for what we have for tracing, and then also for the Grafana MCP. So if I just open Claude, so like I could, for instance, just be like, hey, what traces have errors? And if you haven't used Claude in the directory or approved certain things you're doing already, it will be like, hey, do I have the permission to go and do those things? Which is both useful because you don't want to accidentally let it do something that you weren't wanting it to do, because it does have permissions to actually change things. So for instance, I wanted to always see that, no big deal. And it will go through and try figuring that out. If we go back over here, let's see if it figured things, if it did everything. Okay, so it created a dashboard, theoretically. So let's see what that dashboard looks like. So if we go to dashboards, I'm going to refresh this. So I have the MCP Academy one. At the moment, it says that I have no data, which is not exactly great. Let's see. Okay, there we go. So like in the last 3 hours, like the amount of time that it would take me to go through for each of these things and like end up trying to get them all would be quite a lot. So like I could, for instance, go and ask it to also be like, please add a panel for my flame graph, and see if it actually does something like that. If we go back over here to I have another thing that I have to prove. But you can see that basically it has access to what the different trace IDs are. So like say if I have, let's see. Yes, I do want to proceed. Thank you. OK, so if I have this trace ID here, for instance, if we go back over to here, if I go into Explorer, if I do Tempo, I can put my trace ID here, which, of course, I broke something at some point. Let's see. I wonder if I killed. Yeah, I must have broke something a little bit. Yeah, I broke something. Yay, demos. But like, say if I were to, yeah, let's just go over to, let's see, Explorer. I'm still in Explorer. So like Pyroscope, for instance, since I have JavaScript, I only have wall CPU, not regular, and if I run that, we can see that there's a graph. We can see that I have a bunch of things happening here. If I go back over here, not here. Okay, so let's see. It claims that it added a CPU flame graph. Let's see if it actually did that. So if I go over to my dashboards, refresh this. Yeah, so I don't know why it's not getting that data because, I mean, yay, because things don't work always, but we can see that I have the graph that I added there. So basically, you can use it to add all the different things that you need. Let's see if I look at an old one that I created and see if no, there's just something wrong with my data. I broke something. Yeah. So basically, yeah, you can just, if you are trying to learn things about observability, if you're trying to go and debug what is happening, maybe you have a customer who is saying, hey, I'm having this issue. You can use this to help you figure out what is happening there. If you are working on your own observability project and you want to create your own MCP server, you can go and do that. So basically, it just makes it a lot easier and gives you a lot more data than what you, unless you're like super experienced with observability, then you probably could find in that at least same amount of time. And sometimes just going to Google and being like, hey, how do I do this? Or for instance, like if I wasn't using Grafana MCP, when I was just using ChatGPT, being like, hey, what is the query that I specifically need to do this one thing? It's not always right, but when you're giving it information, like say whether you're passing in, maybe it's specific data, or you, like for instance, there's a Gra AI which has access to the docs, so it can pull things from the docs, but it can't do anything with your, like creating databases or going through your actual data, whereas like having your own MCP server, you could go and do that. So I think that since things aren't all working, but yeah, basically that's kind of it. I learned some stuff about MCP from these lovely folks for our Grafana MCP and such. So yeah, thanks everyone.